Hello, friends. Welcome once again to the Perfect Bound Podcast. This is a podcast all about anything and everything comic books and comics related, brought to you by the Panel Jumper. My name is Ben. With me, as always, is Nicole Lamb.
Hello.
Chris Casso.
Hello.
And, of course, Cole Hornaday.
Hey there.
How is everybody this fine evening?
Conscious.
Still alive, yes.
Cold. It snowed yesterday here in Seattle. That was interesting.
After torrential flooding rains.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was I went grocery shopping in the middle of that, and I had to take a leap of faith, like an Indiana Jones style, to try and get over a couple rivers, and I missed. So yeah.
I've terrible wet weather shoes, so my socks always get soaked. I should really buy another pair of shoes. That's on me. We don't need to discuss my footwear on the show.
Sure we do. It's a fashion time.
Yeah, Foot Talk, brought to you by the Panel Jumper and Perfect Bound
the foot
Podcast.
section.
Mhm.
Anyway, so it's been a heck of a year, friends. It's good to see you all. We're not in the store. We're in our own homes. And
There is no store.
There is no store. And if you want to learn more about that, go back a couple episodes when we talk about the whole thing with Scott. So aside from, like, normally on the year-end shows, I like to be like, what was the best thing? What was the worst thing? You know, what were your favorite things? What were the biggest news stories? Well, there is just one big news story this year, just kind of affects everything else. So maybe everything we talk about will be connected to that. Maybe not. But let's just get to it. I sent out, just a bullet point of one thing, other than the sad things that I sent out. But there was, of course, along with the pandemic that hit us this year, there was lots of civil rights protests. And one of the things to come out of that was that Punisher creator Gerry Conway tried to reclaim the Punisher logo by making Black Lives Matter t-shirts. And I believe, Cole, you have one right there.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know, and you probably do, the police like to use the Punisher logo as their own personal logos, much to the chagrin of Gerry Conway and Marvel. And they've been trying pretty constantly and consistently to reclaim it.
Should be to the chagrin of everybody, because Punisher is not a good person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's even on issue, the Punisher himself sort of lambasts some cops because they see his symbol on their squad car or something.
Yeah. Did that did they report any final numbers on how well he did with that, as far as raising funds go? Or
I don't know. I know they sold out. Cole, do you know if they made?
I'd have to. I can go dig up my notes from the Panel Jumper episode, the streaming show we did. There were. I believe there were 2 or 3 different versions of the image, and they all went to. I believe they all went to different funding sources, and they sold out almost instantly because it was well. It was well promoted. It was well shared across social media. I can't tell you without doing some digging and distracting to go get the numbers up. So,
what else happened this year, friends?
Go ahead.
Well, I went through every Comics Dungeon rant and Trusty Henchman newsletter, and I'm thoroughly depressed now because I know all the news. I know we lost a lot of people this year as far as talent and artists, as well as Chadwick Boseman, which we're going to mention. We just recently lost our favorite lumpy artist, Richard Corbin. It's probably the
lumpiest art style.
Yes, the lumpiest art style.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my depressing thing. But Chris, do you have something less depressing?
Yeah, I was going to mention, it's because this thing brings me a little bit of hope. It was reported back in July, but Marvel and Scholastic are uniting to launch an all-new line of graphic novels for young readers. and it's starting with Miles Morales, and I think they were going to do a Miss Marvel as well eventually. And to me, that's kind of, I mean, it's good for a number of reasons. And one of it is that Scholastic books just, I think, have a far better reach than normal Marvel comics to get younger readers. And I mean, just imagining Scholastic book fairs and getting them into schools and libraries. And it's also focusing on getting that material to be more appropriate, you know, a little bit less murdery in some places. And also, it's just Scholastic's like making the big money right now. Like they're kind of the king of the industry because between Dogman, Amulet, the Raina Telgemeier books, like they kind of control stuff. So this feels like Marvel finally making like a really smart decision. It feels like it's 5 to 10 years too late, but it gives me hope. You know.
Yeah. And they've also greenlit a lot of movies. I think Dogman was greenlit for a movie, and I know Lumberjanes is going to go over to like HBO Max.
Yeah.
So we're going to see a bunch of animated stuff in the future out of these extremely high sellers that are marketed to young ones.
So that might just overall increase, I don't know, the longevity of the medium, infuse it into the next generation, because, you know, Marvel and DC for the past chunk of years hasn't been trying as well as they should have. And it's nice to just see one of them take just the right step. So, yeah. So there was that. And then I thought I'd also briefly mention there was kind of like a domino effect of news. If you go back to like September or so, Archie announced that they were going to put their entire line available on Comixology Unlimited and like same day release, digital and print. And that's not too worries because usually you kind of want some distance from the print release so that comic stores can have a chance to make money. But with Archie stuff, wasn't really much of a worry because it's different than the superhero market and the traffic that brings. But then Marvel also, I think, reduced the time period. Marvel and DC reduced their time periods. I'd have to get deep into the old newsletters again.
I have Marvels. I don't have DCs, but Marvel went from 6 months to 3 months for the
That's the
digital
big one.
releases. But I don't remember the DC one, unfortunately.
I think it might be DC confirmed because they launched their DC Universe Infinite a 6 month delay. But Marvel waited till I think right after they confirmed that so they could be like, haha, 3 months. And you also have Kodansha announced that new release, new chapters of ongoing manga on Comixology the same day as Japan. So you just have a bunch of these publishers all beginning to like reduce that time. And if we were still running a retail store, I would be very nervous about that.
So like what walk me through that. What would that mean?
Well, the idea is that if there's a large chunk of time between people being able to get something digitally, that they would probably break and get print first, because they don't want spoilers, or it just gives the print books a little bit more of a prestige. Like,
Gotcha.
I got it in print first, and but the more you reduce that, then the people that are already waffling on the fence might just go ahead and be like, digital, especially during a pandemic.
Right.
And the more people are trying to stay home and stay safe, the less they'll want to go to their stores or have things shipped if they don't trust in shipping or whatever. So anything that makes the digital releases more of an option, it's just a little worrisome for retailers. It'll keep taking a little bit more of a bite out of the pie. But that's still more among like superhero stuff that the worry is, I would worry also with like Saga if it came back at any point in time. So yeah, it's a trend that was starting to build around that September period, I think. And I haven't seen any new announcements that, have made it a little bit more nerve-wracking or anything. So we'll see.
Cool.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in following the saga now because I've read the first 2 trades because I'm like everybody else has read this series, but I finally picked it up and
Yep.
It's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Are they? I mean, I know they were taking a break. Is there?
I thought earlier in the year it was like, we are working on it now, and then that was the last I heard. So
Yeah. I think there was just like, yep, we're totally like thinking about doing something. It's just
We're
like,
thinking about getting back to it.
and I don't want to put too much pressure on them, but like during the shutdown phases, if they had gotten an issue out, it would have been nice. Even the first issue, the first return, it would have given stores just a little bit something extra to be like, look, we have a thing you want.
Instead, we got a surprise Walking Dead Negan comic that we didn't want.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Wasn't impressed.
whoop-a-da-doo.
Oh, whoop-a-da-doo.
Yeah.
I mean, some people were happy with that Negan comic, but I don't know. If you want to hear me complain about Robert Kirkman, there's an entire article on my website about that.
Indeed.
TrustyHenchman.com.
Yeah.
Plug.
Yeah. All right. So there's an article that a friend of the store, Rob Salkowitz, posted on ICV2, and he goes through his top stores of 2020, and a lot of it we've already discussed at length, either on the show or at other venues. I don't want to spend too much time, but it's this year was a dumpster fire. Everything like DC split ties with Diamond. We've talked about that at length. And then they I don't know what happened to the one retailer distributor they either fired or let go or cut ties with.
UCS, is that
Yeah.
what it is?
There was a couple different reports, but essentially it sounded like UCBS dropped DC.
They were like, this is hard.
Yeah, that's what it kind of sounds like. It also just sort of sounds like DC, like they forced like a whole bunch of things, like you have to spend a minimum of this much in an order, and da da da. And I think the UCB, whatever that company is, was just like, out, we out.
Yeah.
So I don't want to know what kind of nightmares any retailers had to deal with as they had to flip between distributors.
Are you two still sort of in that? I don't want to call it Schadenfreude period, but the wave of relief where you see all this stuff coming out of the industry and you're like, whew, thank God I don't have to deal with that anymore.
Yeah,
Yes.
even before we closed, we were seeing things that were coming down the pipe, and we were like, oh, thank God we're getting out.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily like we relish in people's pain. We understand the pain they're going through, and we hope that they can hang on, and we understand if they can't.
Yeah.
It's like one long, like 8-9 month Keanu Matrix dodge. It's still in slow motion, and we're like, oh, there's another bullet. Haha, goodbye. Speaking of Keanu.
Sad Keanu.
Keanu on Mars.
Every single con got canceled after March. I know that Scott and Comics Dungeon / Corner Comics were one of the first ones to cancel or to pull out from the con. I think even before the whole thing was canceled. Everything got canceled since then. Now they're talking about possibly having some in maybe limited capacity next year. Now that the vaccines are starting to roll out, but I don't think the demographic of comic book reader is really high on the list of people who get the vaccine.
Yeah. I would also just be nervous about everybody, any anti-vaxxers and anybody that's just kind of not willing to have empathy for anybody else. So yeah.
Cons are notoriously breeding grounds for
exactly.
diseases.
Before the pandemic, people had questionable hygienic practices.
That's when
that may
Scott
not have changed for a lot of people.
When Scott and Laney, decided to pull out. I mean, that must have been like one of the most immediate thoughts of just kind of like, oh crap, no, we get sick normally.
Yeah. Like are we taking cash? Like, how
And how many fights would you get in saying no cash? I mean, there's just so many people that are so antagonistically stubborn about things like that, because we had some of that at the store. But even today, I was at a hospital for various reasons, and there were elderly people that were fighting the receptionists about doing policy things in having to do with COVID. So it's just like, we're not in any kind of safe place where we could count on everybody to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And a comic convention is not where you should sacrifice your life.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Words to live by. What else happened this year of note that we want to talk about?
Well, we probably mentioned in an earlier podcast that Dan DiDio left DC. I think that was one of the earlier ones. But when I was
Yeah.
going through the newsletters, I missed that he joined the Kubrick School faculty.
Yeah.
So that's a little follow-up from what we talked about earlier this year.
The Kubrick school fact, like Stanley Kubrick?
Kubert.
Kubrick.
Oh, sorry.
Joe Kubert.
Joe Kubert.
I
know.
totally
I
misheard
said
that.
wrong. Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. He landed somewhere else there.
Yeah. Haven't heard
do-
any updates about him on that, though.
Yeah.
I do like the fact that at one point Jim Lee had to assure audiences that no, we're still going to be publishing comics
Yeah.
For now.
for now.
I do not envy him that position, because you have to try and look like the glue's not coming apart, but the corporate overlords are doing all these weird things.
It's like Spider-Man holding the two sides of the ferry together.
Yeah, the train's going, and
Yeah.
somebody needs to Photoshop Jim Lee's face on that Spider-Man scene with the train.
Of course, people like Spider-Man's Marvel and Jim Lee's on DC, blah, blah, blah.
Whatever.
It's all pain. It's
all pain all the way down. Yeah, I noticed a lot of my notes were DC doing all kinds of things, and I either glazed over whatever Marvel did or just shows how much DC did a lot of things this year and not necessarily for the greater good.
Yeah.
There was that website, the outhousers.com. Are they even still around?
Not really. I think the one of the guys there moved over to Bleeding Cool. There's a lot of news on Bleeding Cool, but I refuse to look at it.
It makes your eyes bleed.
It makes my eyes bleed, and also because I don't know how many viruses are on each page click on that site. So
apparently, and it's been a while, I just pulled them up, and the headline is "So long and thanks for all the clicks." Apparently, they closed on February 8th, 2019.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But the reason I bring them up is because they had a widget on the sidebar that says it's been X number of days since DC did something stupid.
Yeah.
And apparently it has been 133 days.
I don't think they've been updating.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah. Also, like a third of the DC editorial staff was laid off. They did more layoffs. I think there were, I think you mentioned something, Chris, in one of the newsletters that like there were two women who were in leadership roles, which was like, yay. And then like a lot of the Black executives were laid off and it was like, boo. So it was just like almost no, yes, no, we're still at a deficit.
Getting there. Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking through some of the old newsletters here, and this one was kind of cool to see. Again, going back to Scholastic, the new chapter of Dogman came out, and it was the #1 best-selling book overall in the U.S. and Canada, and I'm pretty sure it beat Stephen King. And that makes my heart feel good. Nothing too much.
Dav Pilkey's just printing money these days,
Oh,
isn't he?
yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the movie? Like, that will be the best-selling movie once people can go see it, you know? So that was kind of cool news.
So you got the cool news, I got the depressing news. I don't think I have anything of hope in my notes.
Well, we've mentioned Richard Corbin and Chadwick Boseman. Actually, I just saw something today that said that his final performance as Black Panther is going to be in an upcoming cartoon that Disney/Marvel is working on.
Yeah, and the leaked investor day that Kevin Feige did for Marvel, like Phase 4 rollout and like into some Phase 5 stuff, said that they're not recasting Black Panther, so they're going to go in different directions.
Which I think is a good call.
It's a tricky one. I mean, it gives honor to him and the legacy that he has, and in that way, it's really beautiful. As far as storytelling is concerned, not having Black Panther, it can hurt a bit, you know, to not have T'Challa.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So who do you think it's going to be? Is it going to be Shuri?
I would suspect that based on comic book reference, but
Yeah.
they could go in a different direction. I mean, supposedly Ryan is writing the next Black Panther as we speak. So
Mhm.
We also lost Batman editor and writer Denny O'Neil.
mhm.
And that I saw that caught my eye because Cole and I did a panel jumper episode where our friend Keith played Denny.
Mhm.
I had a really great interaction with Denny O'Neil back when I was I think it was like 91 or 2 when I started graduate school, and I needed to write a graduate school paper, and I wanted to write a paper on mask performance and Batman. And I had no clue where to start in writing an academic paper, like what might be too much to bite off and try to chew. But I wrote him a letter and I said, would you be interested in answering some questions for me for my paper? And he wrote me right back, and I still have this little it's in my scrapbook, this little piece of stationery with his little typewritten note and his signature saying, I'd love to send me I won't have time to talk over the phone, send me a blank tape and your questions. And I sent him a blank tape and my questions, and I got it back like 5 months later. Way after I needed it. But I had this great tape with this interview with him giving some terrific responses, and also going off on philosophical diatribes about the meaning of superheroes and society and stuff. And I hate to say it, but I loaned that tape to a college professor, and he never gave it back to me. To this day, I really regret it. The guy wasn't even in my department. He was in my girlfriend's department, in the lit department. And to this day, I regret never getting that back because it was pretty precious. Yeah. But it also was like, I will always have a tremendous fondness for Denny O'Neil for that reason alone. The guy took time out for some nerdy drama graduate student, answered a lot of goofy questions with verve and alacrity, and it's great. He would be missed. He will be missed.
Who else? We mentioned a number of names before we started rolling. Who else we lose this year?
Well, there's actors from, of course, the many original Star Wars actors. Dave Prowse, who was original Darth Vader, died at 85, and Jeremy Bulloch, who is the original Boba Fett, died. I didn't want to make it all about me, but I have this great book where I have collected a lot of their autographs because they're all at the same comic book convention, and Jeremy Bulloch was the most fun.
I heard that he really took on the con experience.
Loved his fans a lot, so I have very positive memories of that. For me, one of my favorite cinematic designers, Ron Cobb, died early on the pandemic, and Cobb designed everything from Star Wars aliens to interiors and spaceships for Alien, to Conan the Barbarian, the original Conan the Barbarian. He had this beautiful illustrative style, and he did political cartoons for a long time too. But there was nothing more fascinating to me than looking at movie magazines like Fantastic Films and Starlog and seeing Ron Cobb's illustrations there, because they were just all so beautifully rendered, and frequently they weren't images that were ever used in the films, but they were the launching point for other designers, like the Nostromo designs he did for Alien. Well, his ship designs were too beautiful and sleek and pristine to fit in what eventually was the mise-en-scène for Alien. But he also designed like the Hammerhead alien from the Star Wars canteen, and everybody loves a Hammerhead, you know. In fact, they borrowed his name for the animated series when they made one of the Ithorian aliens a Jedi, and I think they called that Jedi Roran Cobb, something like that. The hardcore Star Wars fans out there will correct me, I'm sure, but yeah.
What they should do, because you just made a great pitch there as well, is that since they're doing all these new Star Wars, like what it looked like they offered like 12 new Star Wars TV shows. Yeah. The next TV show should be Everybody Loves Hammerhead. you know, and it's all, you know, day-to-day adventures at the cantina, you know, Cheers style. He's the norm of Mos Eisley. So yeah.
Nice.
And,
Any other notable names?
yeah, Jiro Kuwata. He was the creator of the Batman manga. He passed away on July 2nd. And those Batman manga are magical. They're great. Grant Morrison based little chunks of his Batman run off of it. Like he brought back Lord Deathman, who is a great villain. So that was somebody else who passed away.
Juan Gimenez. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but Metabaron's artist.
Yeah, Jimenez. Yeah.
I think we actually lost him to COVID, if I'm remembering correctly.
I think so. Yeah, and I think you're right. Before I forget it, this isn't a pass away, but some other bit of news that's interesting because it kind of rolls all into all the weird digital stuff happening right now, and also some of the Time Warner stuff, which maybe we'll mention that briefly, or the HBO stuff, I mean. But AT&T sold Crunchyroll to Sony for $1.18 billion.
Jeez.
And it seems weird because that seems like throwing away money. Because the manga audiences in the US are growing. I mean, like Netflix released a statement a little while ago, like they want more manga. And I mean, Amazon's trying to get more manga up or anime on there. I mean,
I got schooled recently by a teenager about the difference between manga and anime.
yeah. So it just seems really odd for one of these huge media conglomerates to be like, yeah, take away all this stuff from us. We don't know what to do with it. And that's what it feels like they're doing with a lot of things, like their good relationships with directors by, you know, forcing Dune to be on HBO Max first. And yeah, there was some interesting articles because first it was Christopher Nolan complaining about it, but everybody kind of poo-pooed on him because they were saying that what's that movie that his
Tenet.
last movie, Tenet, yeah, that he kind of forced a bad issue at hand there. But then the director of Dune and Arrival, he poo-pooed, and nobody's poo-pooing on him.
And
and
it's
like,
poo-pooing on the poo-poo.
yeah, and so there's a couple just interesting perspectives from directors about all the effort, all the work that they put in to making these theatrical releases and how they're willing to wait. And it's understandable from the corporation side. It's like, hey, we need money now, but at the same time, in some of these cases, the directors or the producers aren't being told about these decisions until the last possible minute, which seems a little disrespectful, you know?
Yeah.
Seems to be a status quo in big industry stuff, and we've seen that in comic books where, you know, Baltazar didn't realize that his comic was canceled until he saw it in like previews or an article or something like that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people like over at Dark Horse, I think, got cancellations as well. And they're just like, oh, or like they're not necessarily cancellation, but I think that Spell on Wheels, they got message of like, oh, we're just going to release you as a trade now. And they're like, oh, I've been promoting my single issues.
Right. Yeah, and as far as the Warner Brothers thing, with the 2021, you know, slotting of the movies on both HBO Max and in theaters, that company in general, we've already seen some interesting straight to digital type things with comics, obviously. So it's not a terrible surprise to me that they would do that as well, where so many people are going to be streaming. They're going to get maybe more of an influx in the HBO Max, which is going to get that like sustainable, you know, money from people every month. And who knows when, if, you know, that we'll have a regular theater experience again. So I just wish that there would be more of a give and take with theaters to be able to at least. I was watching some video where it was about how much money you have to give to a company if you're a theater, just to put the movie on the screen. And if they could lessen that and say, hey, we're going to take less of a cut. You can still run this in your theater and people will do stuff on streaming, then it gives people an option, and then it maximizes profit for the theaters, which still might not make the theaters continue, but it would still help, and
Yeah.
people are still going to be getting money. But
And it's a good faith gesture.
it is a good
Yeah.
faith gesture. Yeah,
Some more of those would be nice.
Yeah,
it would
meaning
be nice.
it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's a good idea, no,
It's a good
It's
idea, but it
helpful.
means that rich people aren't going to get more rich, and so it's not going to work.
they can't buy
Right.
that second island. What are
Darn
they
it.
going to do?
I know that's always like, the theaters don't make money on the ticket sales. It's on the concessions, and
Exactly,
so-
because they're spending all the money giving it back to the big corporations.
Yep.
Yeah.
and yet that Hollywood math makes it so that these movies don't make a profit.
Yep.
Anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing Wonder Woman on Christmas Day in HBO Max. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna watch it, strangely, even though I hated the first one,
Mm.
but mostly so my husband could see Cheetah.
Yeah.
He's a Tiger fan. He likes, cat ladies.
He
Why
likes
not?
some cat ladies.
Yeah.
have we wrapped up our in memoriam section? Are there any other notable?
I mean, unless you want me to just read a list of like 20 people. But
well, I don't think we need to do
It
that.
doesn't need to be
I
that
don't think so.
depressing.
I would
hold
like
it.
to go back
That's where
and
my tone is.
Yes, Cole.
I think the one that impacted me the most was Nicole already mentioned Richard Corbin. And strangely enough, at the start of the pandemic, I got a bug at my tailpipe to start collecting old undergrounds. And I was actually collecting Death Rattle and Skull, some like his earliest stuff, and immersing myself in this. And that's what was kind of tragic and ironic, is that he's one of those artists that I would do every once in a while. I'd do a deep dive and go, oh, I want to get everything I can that this guy has done. And there was a time where at the old Comics Dungeon location, y'all had there's an adult section. And I walked in one day and someone had just dumped their entire trade paperback collection of these heavy metal collections of Corbin. And I bought every goddamn one of them because my impulse control was out of control. And I'm so glad that I bought them then. Den collections and the Bodyssey and the Full House Usher and I watched them escalate in value while he was still alive. But he's one I'm really, really going to miss, because his style kept evolving and he still continued to. I think he's an artist that introduced all of us to in American horror comics the concept of body horror before we had that phrase. Because he could make something grotesque and sexy at the same time, and I don't know of another artist who could do that.
Grotesque?
Globular erotica? I don't know.
Blobrotica.
Blobrotica?
Yeah.
There you go.
So,
Perfect.
anyway, I just wanted to piggyback on Nicole's comment, because he is truly an artist I'm going to miss, because he was still producing. He was still producing thematic books like his Poe collections through Dark Horse and his Lovecraft stories. He still was he still was on fire.
Yeah. I think one last person of note would be Richard Sala. That one kind of snuck up on us this year. I think he was like 65, if I'm remembering correctly.
I can't quite remember.
And that one just kind of, like Death Does, kind of came out of nowhere, where it was like, what? Huh? Wait, how old is this man? What happened? So, yeah. For the indie fans out there, he was a notable creator.
Yeah. So this was an interesting year in terms of what was released and titles that were probably promised but were never delivered, and just the whole distribution thing. Is it gonna get to a store? Is it digital only? But do you all have favorite comics that came out this year that you'd like to talk about?
I have favorite comics, but in some of them I can't even tell you if they came out this year, because my game has been catching up finally to everything I've bought in the past 5 years. And some of it I think is right on the cusp. So I'm going to talk about them regardless.
Do it.
Let's see. The handy thing is I have an entire website where I wrote everything down so I could just check and be like, what was I thinking? Mare Internum was one of my favorite books. That was a book that Nicole gifted to me. And it's a web comic, but the interesting thing is, from the webcomic to the printed book, there's a lot of editorial changes that do really enhance it. So I do recommend people read that. And it's it's kind of like a hard science fiction book about a couple scientists that kind of get lost in the underground sea on Mars, but it's dealing more so with mental health issues, as one of them has a number of problems and starts the book trying to commit suicide. Um, and it's just really, 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 really well done. And it rocketed that creator to just being like one of my favorite creators. Their name is Dershing Helmer. And so if you get a chance, I highly recommend Mare Internum. And do you want me to list a couple, or do we all want to take turns?
Well, let's go round robin. Cole, what do you got?
Oh my goodness. So one of the joyful things for me was Rick Veitch started working on his King Hail Heroica once again, and he's self-publishing these. So the sequel to the Brat Pack and Maximortal is now his boy Maximortal, and he's actually publishing these. I think he's publishing them to order through Amazon, through his Sun Comics press. But I'm a huge Rick Veitch fan, and I reread all of his Swamp Thing run because I wrote an article for the Holland Files Swamp Thing fanzine a couple of months ago. So I hadn't spent a lot of time with Veitch as a storyteller, as a writer, and as an illustrator for quite some time. And it was really fun to go back because I do think he's quite brilliant. And he's still challenging the status quo of superhero storytelling, but he's also skewering the industry while he's at it. If you know the history of publishing Brat Pack and the Maximortal and all that, it's always been very, very rocky. But now I think he's got a safe place where he can work at his own pace, and he's also continuing to produce his surreal comics, his Rare Bit Fiends, which is always fascinating. That's basically his dream journal in comics form, which I originally thought was just silliness, and then I picked up an issue and I'm like, this is outrageous, and I need to read every one of them. But yeah, the new Boy Maximortal.
Would you say that is more, less, or equally disturbing as the previous Maximortals and Brat Pack?
This is not quite so brutal, okay. But it has the possibility of going down that road. Okay. I knew you were going to ask me something like that. And I read this right when it came out, and of course, everything is brain fog now. Yeah. So I think it's kind of gentler because it's dealing with more the zeitgeist and the creative force behind, because he does a lot of metatextual stuff. Mm-hmm. So I guess to answer your question, this is not half as gory nor half as brutal or cruel in his efforts to satirize what happened to, like, say, the creators of Superman. And if you remember, Brat Pack was basically a send-up of the death of Robin, because he was he thought that was a pretty toxic indication of where superhero storytelling was going, and he was right. But yeah.
Cruel satire is a good way to summarize Brat Pack. So yeah.
But it's still one of my favorite books for that reason, because it doesn't pull any punches.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, do you have a highlight from this year?
Yeah, even though it's not finished yet, I would highly recommend Decorum. While I'm kind of starting to have a little Jonathan Hickman burnout, where he does the same things in everything that he writes, it's still really solid writing and world building and interesting things. The reason why you should pick up the book is because of Mike Huddleston's art. He is such a varied artist who he's just got such an amazing range, and he makes gorgeous art. His coloring is phenomenal, and it's an interesting story that you don't have to say, I'm going to do 10 volumes of this. It's 8 issues and it's done. So if you're missing Saga, I would recommend Decorum. There's, cool little like anthropomorphic mantis guys in there and stuff. And it's just a fun adventure. It kind of becomes like an assassin school at one point, like a lady assassin school, and it's got a lot of great humor and fun to it. And yeah, I don't even know if I have a synopsis to give you. I just think it's an interesting sci-fi. It's got like a lot of references to different things, including Jodorowsky's Dune. There's I guess the plot synopsis was that the world's most polite, well-mannered assassin goes and kills people who are rude. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's something like that. That's kind of the general gist. Is Decorum is a really good assassin, and she's also all about manners. And she picks up this woman who is she is working as a courier to try to pay off a debt because there was a plague that came across the land. I guess I'm doing a plot synopsis, where people who are affected by this virus can go on ice until they find a solution to it, which I guess is kind of timely. But you're pretty much in debt, like in immense debt, and so you're constantly working just to try to keep whoever it is, your loved ones, alive, and that's what this courier is. She's brought into the fold of assassins, even though she's not really bloodthirsty. So there's an interesting kind of odd couple thing that happens there.
Cool.
All right. Any more from the group?
I got a long list.
Yeah, how much time do you want?
Okay, one more each.
Oh.
We got to end sometime.
No, we don't. Well, I don't have a copy of it, but because I got it from the library. But Chris had recommended on his Trusty Henchman newsletter. I think he reviewed it. It's a new graphic novel called "The Gift for a Ghost" by Borja Gonzalez, which I think is one of the most beautiful graphic novels I've seen in ages. And if I wasn't impoverished right now and living on the COVID dole, I'd be buying copies for lots of people, especially a lot of the younger women in my life. So what I've done is recommend it to moms with young preteen daughters. It's I don't know, Chris, can you help me out with the story? It's a parallel story. It's beautifully illustrated.
Yeah,
Wonderfully stylized illustration, but it's a parallel story. And there's a young woman. Is she in the 1800s?
Yeah, and she's a poet, and
writes weird, creepy poetry that we describe as being like goth emo today.
Yeah, very goth emo. And then there's a girl that I couldn't quite place it. I felt like it must be like within this past decade.
Yeah,
and she has trouble really connecting with people as well. And it's weird. So one of the ways my brain started to characterize it is, what if Mike Mignola became a 90s underground artist instead of doing Hellboy? Because it has there's many Mignola-esque scenes. Like one of the girls dresses up as a skeleton, and it just looks completely like a Mignola piece because of the clean, simple lines and heavy blacks. But it has that kind of wandering, meandering 90s slice of life, things suck kind of tone to it, a little black hole here and there, and the two stories kind of run parallel, and there might be time travel. Everything's very vague. It
is, and they do intertwine because our young lady from the modern time, she's trying to start a band with her girlfriends, but of course nobody knows how to play an instrument, and that doesn't matter because they're going to be a punk rock band anyway.
Yeah.
But
you don't need talent. Yeah.
You don't need talent. And that just resonated so deeply with me. But it was about these two socially displaced young women, and essentially out of time, out of space, but resonating on the same frequency. And I think that's really that's the only thing we really needed to know, was that they connect with each other across space and time because they are on the same creative, spiritual frequency, and they touch one another from time to time. And now I'm remembering more about it, and I'm like, I really just need to go buy a copy of that book so I can loan it to people. So that was a great recommendation, Chris. I got so much out of that book. I'm so glad that you reviewed it.
I'm glad.
I was drawn to that book too, and it's available on Hoopla for those Seattleites that don't want to buy it, but maybe want to check it out.
Yeah.
And then maybe buy it when they fall in love with it.
Mm-hmm. And that was A Gift for a Ghost.
A Gift for a Ghost by Borja Gonzalez.
Yeah.
All right. Chris, why don't you tell us one more?
I'll go for a hat trick because I've accidentally reviewed it twice already because I loved it so much. Magical Boy. It's an online comic, and it is a book about a trans man, a teenager, who comes from a long line of magical girls who save the world from demonic forces. And his mother wants him to be a magical girl, but his mother doesn't recognize that he identifies as a man now. And he does start to develop magical girl powers, and against his will, because whenever you turn into a magical girl, your clothes turn all frilly and everything. And he's just like, what the is this? Sorry, I shouldn't swear here, should I?
Yeah, we're so used to swearing now on other channels, things that we talk on.
But he's got an interesting cast of characters. Like his best friend is a lesbian who is forming a relationship with the pastor's daughter, who initially hates them and belittles them and doesn't recognize the main character as they want to be recognized. There's a bunch of other really interesting characters. One of my favorites is the young punk, the troublemaker in school. He loves cute things and is not ashamed to show it. So he's a big fan of magical girl fiction stuff, and so he becomes a friend of the main character. And so it's a series about dealing with that transition and accepting who you are, and finding people who accept you for who you are as well. It was entirely free for a while, and I hadn't finished yet, but I just went and checked it out, and the first chunk of chapters are free, but now you got to sign up for the hostess tapas, and because apparently it just got picked up by, I think, Scholastic, and they're gonna make a movie and maybe a cartoon for it.
Oh, nice. Because it got a GLAD award or something, right?
It got a GLAD award, so it's been blowing up, and so unfortunately you can't read the whole thing automatically without a Tapas account right now. But they are going to get a graphic novel out, which will be interesting because, like a lot of these web comics, it scrolls up to down, so they have to transfer it and readjust it. But I highly recommend it. It's just a very empathetic story about accepting people, and it has a great sense of humor and a lot of great artwork.
Chris, what's the name of? I'm trying to look it up because I can't remember. I think it's an Argentinian publisher.
Oh, is it the robot? Not Red Robot.
No, they did, and there was this great kaiju Lovecraftian graphic novel that was only available online.
Yes, Mega was the comic.
Yeah, Mega's the book.
And Stonebot.
Stonebox. Okay.
Bot. B-O-T.
Stonebot. Yeah. The Mega was like this profound discovery. It was like, and apparently that artist has done. You can read Mega free online at the Stonebot site, and you can read a lot of their other comics. There is the one about the hyper intelligent ape and stuff like that, and they're quite good comics, and they're the care and the detail that have gone into these books, and they're free online, but they're not. I don't think they've ever been printed in the States, which is another reason why they're so delicious. And
one about the chimp was, but Mega has not.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of them are, some of them aren't.
Sorry, kind of hijacked that, but you just reminded me that you had reviewed Mega and Trusty Henchman. I'm like, oh, that's a book that more people need to know about because it's for free.
That creator, Salvador Sanz, S-A-N-Z, also did some Lovecraft work. And if you find their Instagram, they keep posting things that we can't get over here. And it's just
Yeah. Well, Aaron Tarbuck had posted. There was an earlier a horror graphic novel that Sands had done that he said this is the best horror graphic novel I've ever read, and you can't find any English translations that are not under $200 in the States. So yeah, really fascinating artist.
Nicole, you got any other highlights for this year?
Yeah, I wouldn't be me if I didn't have some lighthearted smut to end the year. The series Money Shot, I believe I did review it at some point this year. It came out in a volume 1, and volume 2 has been offered in this month's preview, so we'll probably see it in February. And it's just, it's just silly and lighthearted and fun. It has a good time, and it has a ridiculous premise of, funding science through pornography, like you do. And the art's great. I think it's the artist from, of course, I didn't look anything up. I think it's the artist who did Buffy for a while.
Yeah,
And
I think so.
it's Seeley, Tom Seeley? Tim?
They call him Tim.
Tim?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a lot of fun. So if you're just looking for something to get your mind off of how horrible everything is, Money Shot will do that. It's a good time.
Who published that again?
I believe that was Scout.
Huh. We'll
Let me look it up.
later. Yeah, that works.
Speaking of things that were horrible, were there any big disappointments that anybody felt happened this year?
I mean, the year.
Well,
Yeah.
grand news stories aside, any
DC
hype titles that didn't live up to their promise?
Well, DC made such an effort to push that Black Label imprint, and then they nuked it. They just got rid of it. And it's, on the one hand, I don't think I care either way, other than I do like the idea that you have this little imprint where you could just kind of do anything regardless of maturity level. But it's just the fact that they worked it up so much. And this is the part where I'm petty as well. They were oversized, thin books, and they were a pain in the tuchus to store and deal with on New Comic Book Day. And that was just kind of like, all that pain in the butt is like, they just gave up,
Yeah, they were putting their evergreen titles there. They're things that are,
Yeah.
important, and then who cares?
Yeah. So as far as a publishing decision, it's not that the content was necessarily bad. It's just that they let somebody in corporate make the decision to be like, no, we can't be that mature. And it's just kind of like, you can if you just say you're mature.
Exactly.
Also, this format is ridiculous because it's not going to fit in your file box, and it's this is a $7 book,
Yeah.
and like something like I'm debating about whether I want to review this other history of the DC universe, whether it's someone else's. Anyway, but this is not a comic book. I mean, it's a narration with illustrations, so that's kind of okay for me. It works, but like the new Hellblazer series, which is done in this format, is ridiculous. It's you're making me pay $7 for this book, and it doesn't match any other format. It's not gonna. It doesn't sit on the shelf well. It's not going to fit in a file box, and it just stinks of gimmickry, and it's not even that good a series. So, but because I've been reading Hellblazer since the beginning, I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna buy it, and I'm gonna be crabby about it.
At some point, you're going to have an intervention with yourself, but that's for another time. Money Shot is published by Vault Comics, which I get confused with Scout because I don't know.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's Tim Seeley, Sarah Beatty, and Rebecca Isaacs is the artist I was thinking of who did Buffy for a really, really long time.
Between Vault, Scout, and Aftershock, and a couple of the others, they kind of blur a little bit.
Yeah.
Because none of them have quite defined themselves as far as a genre of any type. Not that you have to.
Right.
It just makes it difficult when you're trying to, suddenly remember who published a thing.
Right.
So, yeah.
Any other big disappointments coming out of 2020? You can say we don't have to have an answer.
Well, there was stuff I reviewed, like this was the Bowie biography I had a terrible time with, and I'm gonna have to give up on Tanahashi Coates' Captain America, because after like 2 years, I'm not. I had hopes of what he was going to do with this character, that he was going to maybe challenge the status quo, but clearly that was not something he had editorially had the opportunity to do, or maybe that just wasn't his plan. But having not been a super duper fan of Captain America, I'm not on board for more Captain America type stories. The artwork has been terribly inconsistent and frequently really weak. And if Coates' name wasn't on this, I wouldn't be the wiser. So that was very disappointing for me, because right now I'm looking for ways to jump off on a lot of titles because I can't afford them anymore. So that's one.
A little disappointed in, so we kind of mentioned it a couple times now already, but when DC was drowning the market, when things were shut down, Marvel was starving us. And I really would have liked it if they had figured out their release schedule game a bit more, quicker. On one hand, it's like they were cautious. They had to be careful with the pandemic. But there was enough books that were delayed so long that in my mind, like my sense of time is completely out the window as far as like the X-Men Dawn of X stuff and all that, and Empire. I'm also just disappointed by the fact that there's been like 4 or 5 events all within 2 months, because there was Empire, there's Death Metal, there's the new Future State from DC. And I think
there's 10 of Swords that goes over every X-Men title, and you have to read all of them to get all of the chapters. I think that's
Swords.
like 22 books or something.
King in Black, which is it's not the same as Death Metal, but it's like, hey, let's do hardcore sci-fi death stuff at both companies. And it's just kind of like, fine. So
is that Donny Cates led? Because that would make sense.
Yeah, I'm
not really paying attention. I scan very fast through Marvel and DC these days.
When I do I do upcoming features on my website where I try to figure, I choose like a genre. I'm like, what books in the catalogs of sci-fi are worth looking for, And every time I get to superheroes, I dread doing it now, because, well, first of all, having to get information from DC is just a pain in the butt. And then second of all, like the last time I had to turn it into a game. What's not an event? Can I recommend something that is completely disconnected? And you
not in the last few DC Connects. Everything's
everything's connected. So there's just I thought we were getting out of that, and to a degree in some places we are, but not enough for my taste.
I think less is more, and they still have not realized that that's what we need, because more and more of that dedicated fan base is really getting tired by it, and then on top of it, with unemployment and all kinds of things happening, people just really can't afford it, and like Cole are just looking at ways to cut it down, right?
Yeah.
Can I state something that is a preemptive disappointment for 2021?
Sure.
Apparently, Zack Snyder wants to write a comic book that Jim Lee will draw that features the Joker killing Robin. And every element of that is like, no.
You don't need a better big red frickin' flag as to the toxic interpretation of superheroes on the part of Zack Snyder. That said it all. I was just like, really? You're not even trying to hide this anymore.
Well, the Snyder Cut is coming out, and that was a whole internet wave of people who were really excited about it. So if there's an audience,
I was going to save that for what I'm looking forward to. And what I'm looking forward to is that film being released. So the pleading, childish begging and tugging on my shirt coat sleeve, demanding attention for that film will finally be done. That's what I'm really looking forward to that.
That's a good segue.
Good segue.
Yeah.
It's good hope for 2020. Anybody else have anything that they're looking forward to happen next year, which is going to be in like a week and a half?
I'm actually excited for WandaVision and stuff to come on to Disney Plus and some of that Marvel stuff to go again. That really got me excited about going to the movies, although I'll be sitting in my living room.
Right.
But that's a really cool thing. And we're starting with one of the things that I'm most excited for, and that's January 15th. It's like really soon.
Coming up.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the possibility. So with AT&T selling Crunchyroll because they don't want to make money, I assume that means that somebody over there is looking at DC and being like, can we just get rid of that and give it to Marvel? Or Disney? Can we just give it to Disney? And there's got to be at least one executive that's just like, that's a couple billion, isn't it? Batman's worth what, like $5 billion on his own? So there's that little hope that we'll see just this AT&T completely give up, because I'm tired of seeing them act like they know what they're doing. And so that's something. My other hope is that every other publisher will just give all their licenses to Scholastic. Just be like, here, you do something. You know what to do. Call up First Second as well. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Let these companies actually reach out to children and save the industry. Yeah. So, and I think that's what I'm most looking forward to. The companies like First Second, and actually, a lot of publishers are trying to get into diversifying all their stuff, because I'm seeing a lot of them pick up more nonfiction, and from publishers I never expected it. Like Ablaze is picking up nonfiction, and it's just like, okay, the more of these companies beginning to just try something different is a good sign. It's also a sign that they might be in trouble, but
Getting creative because you're in a
Yes.
panic.
Yes.
And a pandemic.
Yes.
Cool. Anybody else?
On a positive thing that I'm actually looking forward to is Barry Windsor Smith's Monsters from Fantagraphics. It's finally got a publication date in April of next year. So this is the book that he has actually been working on for upwards of 35 years. That was originally supposed to be a Hulk story, a Hulk graphic novel. And lo and behold, the concept of Bruce Banner having multiple Hulk personalities that are reflective of his childhood, being abused as a child by his father, was actually Barry Windsor Smith's concept. He apparently shared it with Bill Mantlo or somebody else in the Marvel offices, and they ran with it without ever talking to him. So he never got credit for using those ideas. And it became like a cornerstone of how we tell Hulk stories now, which had to have been incredibly insulting and incredibly infuriating. Well, he, kept starting and stopping on this book, probably because every time he sat down to work on it, it broke his heart. So it's, it's going to be a huge book. I can't remember how many pages it's going to be. It's like, I don't know, it's well over 360 page book that he's been working on for 35 years. And I'm like this close to pre-ordering it, just so I can feel that sense of completion that it will come to me at some point. Because even when it was announced at Fantagraphics, I think it's still been delayed a couple of years. So that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Cool. Nicole, you got anything else looking forward to in the new year?
Financial security, my comic store staying in business. Shout out to the comics place. Woo-woo. And just generally brick and mortar holding on so I can continue to support them.
Indeed. Cool. Well, yeah, 2021 is just right around the corner. Let's move on to book report, everybody. We've already had a mini book report with all the highlighted comics from this year, but let's have an official one because it's on the agenda. And Cole, let's start with you.
Well, I got my hands on Tom Scioli's epic Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. Nice. And this is clearly a labor of love by Scioli, because if you're familiar with his work, I think he broke on the scene doing a series called Godland for Image years ago. And it was really, really a loving tribute to the 70s sci-fi psychedelic bombast that Kirby was giving us with his Fourth World stuff, and later with the Eternals, and particularly his 2001 through Marvel. So this book covers the entirety of his life, and it's done in a really interesting style, not unlike the way Ed Piskor did X-Men Grand Design, where the pages are kind of the pages are this off yellow color. And of course, actually, Scioli also did his take on that story, means of storytelling, and he did Fantastic Four Grand Design, which I've not read. This book is really interesting because it's all done illustration wise. It's all done in pencil, and it's meant to look like it's in pencil, and it's smudgy, and there's really subtle smudges everywhere. It's a dense book, and Scioli does put a disclaimer. He says this is a biography, but it's told in Jack Kirby's voice. So it's kind of like, which it always makes it kind of confusing when you have your lead character as your narrator. I did enjoy this book, but I had a lot of issues because having read so much about Kirby, having read so many other biographies about him, I knew where he was lifting source information, and some of it was verbatim from books like Mark Avanier's King of Comics and Sean Howe's Marvel Comics. Like, all these anecdotes were in other books I read. It's nice to have these drawings telling the story, but I hate to say it, but it's not anything new for me. Also, he made the interesting choice to have Jack be this diminutive, kind of dark-eyed, cartoony looking character, whereas everybody else was sort of rendered in this bland style. And that was kind of troubling to me too. The biggest personal beef I have in this is that around page 172, he does make mention of Science Fiction Land and the Lord of Light debacle that led to the Argo rescue of the hostages in Iran, but it only warranted one little panel.
That's it, huh?
And this caused a great deal of ire from our friend, Mr. B.I.G., which is one of the reasons why I sat down to read this book. So it's a loving tribute for sure from a huge fan who probably is sad that he never actually met his hero in real life, but immersed himself in the process of telling this person's story. And I think he did a fine job. And one of the reasons why I think it's a fine job is that, like, the biggest beef I have with biographies right now is, don't just give me the factoids. I want to know how this person thought. This is an artist you love. This is an artist I love. I want to know what their creative process was like. And that is in here because Kirby was really good about talking about his process, and how it evolved. And that's all in here. But I did have those problems with the information that I was already familiar with. The other thing is that what I do appreciate about this is that this is going to teach people that Stan Lee is not the rock star you think he is. And this is, like all the biographies I read, didn't pull any punches. The Marvel book, the Kirby King of Comics, they told these stories like they were, and they are all in here. Most notably is like the reiteration. It's like, Stan Lee did not create Captain America. So I did appreciate that, and I'm hoping that information will seed contemporary consciousness, because that really bothers me that Stan Lee has been sort of like depicted as this doddering sweet old grandpa, and he had a lot of wrinkles, and Jack Kirby was one of the people he really messed over for a long time. So yeah, I have mixed feelings, but I think it's worth reading.
All right. Thank you, Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics.
Perfect.
All righty. Nicole, what do you want to tell us about?
Well, one thing that actually happened in 2020 is Batman Catwoman actually came out.
That's over a year of waiting.
Yeah, it's a black label too. Written by Tom King, art by Clayman. It's I believe an epilogue on Tom King's Batman run. So if you haven't read all of the Tom King run like me, there'll probably be things that you miss. And I knew that going in. Clayman's art is really, really good. Tom King has got kind of his beat for beat. If you've read enough Tom King, you can get the feeling of it. One critique is that it jumps in time, different timelines, and interweaves between those. And it's very, very clunky in the beginning, to where I had to reread it and go, okay, what's happening? Because they do something, and it's in the panel work, I would say, to some extent, but I'm sure that's also in the scripting that went down. So overall, I'm gonna keep reading it. It's enjoyable. I'm gonna kind of take it as it comes, because I don't have all of the little bits and bobs that were out of the Batman run, but it's finally out. There you go, 2020.
That's supposed to reintroduce the Mask of the Phantasm. Did she pop up yet in the first issue?
I'm not familiar with her,
Okay.
so I don't know.
Skullface?
Like I said, there's just
Okay.
no. I don't believe so. I'm definitely going to reread it, because again, clunky. Yeah. So when I get issue 2 in hand, I'll reread 1 and then 2.
That's the only reason I'd really be. I mean, I'll read it eventually, but as a trade. But Mask of the Phantasm is one of my favorite Batman stories. So the fact that they're like bringing that character into continuity with this story is just like, tell me more. So yeah.
So one of my COVID projects was, you may recall, I was collecting the entire Tom King run, and I finally did right at the start of the pandemic, and then I read them all. So I was like, well, maybe I can. And then of course, like my brain, oh, I've forgotten that entire run, but I did read them all, and I learned a lot about his writing style. So I am really curious of how that series is going to play out and whether you like it. So I would be encouraged to pick it up if you continue to feel good about it.
And I think you should take my review with a grain of salt, considering I don't have all of that under my belt, and that there will be stuff I will miss.
My point being, I don't remember it anyway.
So we're on the same page.
Exactly.
It's all fresh.
Batman and Catwoman. Thanks, Nicole. And finally, Chris Casso, what do you got for us?
I started reading another webcomic. This is on the Webtoons website, and it's called Suitor Armor. It's an Suitor. And it's really, really engaging. I'm really, really liking it. It's basically about a lady in waiting. Her name's Lucia, and she's kind of she takes care of the princess who's going to be married off to the new king and stuff like that. But she was actually adopted by the princess's father, and she was brought to the kingdom one night, like one stormy night, and she's actually a fairy. And they have to hide her wings because apparently there's a war with the fairy folk. And so she grows up, and her and like the princess are like best friends. And one day they go to a tournament, and because it's in celebration of the marriage that's coming, and the king calls forth his sorcerer, and he's just like, yeah, you were working on a project for me, so let's see it. And the sorcerer summons a big evil suit of armor that's sentient, and they have it fight the champion of the realm, and it beats the crap out of him. And it's supposed to be this emotionalist like weapon, and whoever wins the tournament is given like a rose to give to anybody, a declaration of love. And they're like, well, don't give it the rose because it's not a real thing. But the king's just like, do it anyway, it'll be funny. And they do it, and it goes to Lucia and gives her the rose, and she's the only person that doesn't fear it. And so there's kind of a weird kind of mystery, because the sorcerer also seems to have feelings for Lucia, and it makes you wonder, like, is the sorcerer animating the suit of armor with his spirit? And it's like, maybe not. Maybe the suit of armor is sentient in its own right, but it could be responding because she's actually a magical person in hiding. So there's just a lot of like interesting, like, mix of romance, mix of comedy, mix of fantasy. There's a fairy person infiltrates the castle, and there is a war going on, so they're developing that story. One of the things I like is that the knight that the champion that the suit of armor defeated, they kind of telegraph it pretty early on, but his squire is like really concerned about him, and you're just like, yeah, you guys together, and they confirm that later on, and they one of them wants to keep it a secret, and Lucia's just like, all good, I know what that's like for people to want to murder you because of who you are. And the suit of armor starts to gain intelligence, like it can speak, and nobody thought it could speak, and it refuses to tell its creator. So there's this sub level of identity and acceptance going on in the story as well. So it's only at chapter 16. Let's see, it started, I think, in September. And I really should have written down the name of the creator, so I'm going to just kind of scroll down really quick and tell you that. I'm stalling for time here. Here we go. The Purpah. Purpah. There's a lot of webcomics where they just kind of have these names that are just like, I don't want to tell you my real name.
Right.
There was one I was reading, and I think his name was Good Boy.
Yes.
Or something like that.
There was when I was reading, and their name was like The Cow with a K, and it's just like, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's on the webtoons.com, and it's Sutor Armor.
And you can also get the app for your phone. I read stuff on Webtoons on my phone.
Ah, nice.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right.
Updates every Friday.
Thank you, Chris. Well, that is Book Report, and that is our show. The Perfect Bound Podcast is brought to you by the Panel Jumper. See everything Cole Hornaday and I do at thepaneljumper.com. And check out, this is where I always get screwed up because so many things have changed. Before I give you the rest of the bona fides, Chris and Nicole, why don't you tell us about the podcast that you do?
Yeah, it's called We Should Write That Down, which is advice that we don't even take ourselves.
Nope.
And it's basically as we chat to keep ourselves sane. Because at the store, we always used to just basically come up with our own fan fictions, and then we never remember them ever. So this is us being like, okay, well, this is kind of our therapy time together. And it's also just kind of like, well, let's see what kind of weird stuff we could come up with. Yeah. And also, talk about smut and robots.
Because I'm there.
Yeah. So yeah, we should write this down. It's we've got it up on SoundCloud. You can check it out through like my website, trustyhenchman.com.
It's also on Spotify and iTunes. So
yeah. And I also share it up on my Patreon as well. Indeed. And that is how you get my newsletters.
Which are very, very informative.
Yes.
So go to trustyhenchman.com for all that. Subscribe to the Perfect Bound Podcast at perfectboundpodcast.com via Apple Podcasts or any other way you get your podcasts, including Spotify and TuneIn and all the other ones. And send us an email, perfectboundpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again, friends. And we will see you. Thank you for listening. We will see you next time.